Hi, thanks, Megan. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Catherine Crowley. I am CFILC's Ability Tools Program Manager, and I'd like to welcome you to the Ability Tools newest installment in a series of webinars outlining the activities established by the AT Act. Today, we will be providing an overview of the activity training. Last month, we discussed the activity device loan because it was a natural potential step when thinking about how consumers become informed of the services available to them and begin to seek out services based on their individual needs. Using that trajectory of thought, we're continuing along with the experience of the consumer, which could bring them to many possible activities as a next step, one of which could be participating in a training activity. Our training objective for today will be to clarify the particulars of the activity training as it is defined by the AT Act. This is with the intention of facilitating more frequent and effective execution of training activities under the AT Act, and also facilitating more comprehensive and accurate reporting of training activities under the AT Act. Although the AT Act does not include a formal definition of training, the Act describes training activities as instructional events, usually planned in advance for a specific purpose or audiences, which are designed to increase participants' knowledge, skills, and competencies regarding AT devices and services. In general, participants in training can be individually identified and could complete an evaluation of the training. These activities may include training on the benefits of assistive technology and funding sources available to assist targeted individuals and entities in acquiring assistive technology, skills development training in assessing the need for assistive technology devices and assistive technology services, training to ensure the appropriate application and use of assistive technology devices and assistive technology services, training in the importance of multiple approaches to assessment and implementation necessary to meet the individualized needs of individuals with disabilities, and technical training on integrating assistive technology into the development and implementation of service plans, including education, health, discharge, Olmstead, employment, or any other plan required under federal or state law. You might be asking yourself if this activity is a required activity for me to perform. If you're operating with AT Act funding, then yes, training activities are required activities. Training activities exist within the state leadership category, and all activities within this category are designed with the intention of facilitating a consumer's access to assistive technology. It's required by the federal government that state leadership activities take up about 40% of AT Act funding received by the state, with the remaining 60% going to state level activities. So there is an expectation and built-in support for training activity implementation. Examples of training activities include classes, workshops, and presentations, and can be delivered to large or small groups in person or via telecommunications or other distance education mechanisms. There's no minimum amount of time required to perform a training activity, but it must be in-depth enough that it increases skills and competencies. So be sure to focus on content more than looking at a timer. Our work is about quality, not quantity, so don't worry about meeting time benchmarks. In the past, these activities have occurred in libraries, transition fairs, retirement communities, and common community events. But COVID has really put a damper on our in-person engagement activities. So the most relevant training spaces for nearly a year now have been virtual. A great way to continue reaching out to previously mentioned groups is to offer to host a training webinar for their members. I mean, that is exactly what we're doing here. For those who remember the before days, these trainings were regional and in person. The Ability Tools team would travel to your regions and provide in-person, hands-on trainings on topics that matter to you. But in the current environment, our community has met the challenge of pivoting to virtual meetings as a way to obtain the training and collaboration needed to serve our communities. When you host a webinar, it's far easier to control the topic, the participants, the method of collecting feedback. However, when participating in webinars, you'll need to have open communication with your hosting organization in order to successfully execute the training to your standards. Be upfront and have a discussion with your host. If they're counting the webinar as a whole toward AT Act funding, you would likely not be able to count your individual presentation, as it would be considered double dipping for the AT Act funding. If they're not counting the activity as a whole, or if they're reporting it to other funding sources other than the AT Act funding, you would most likely be fine to count it toward your training for your center. Find out from your host if they're performing evaluations. If so, you can have access to their ask if you can have access to their collected information. And if not, ask that you be able to collect satisfaction data from participants for your reporting needs. Also, please keep in mind that if you have an instance where the event is near the end of your reporting year, so the collected data comes to you in the next reporting year, it's best to report the event and the data in the year which you receive the data. As always, with reporting AT Act activities, it's always best to look toward the end goal of your activity to determine where it should be reported. Similarly, focusing on the last actions taken during an activity, the last date of the activity will serve as your benchmark for reporting. This is similar to counting device loans in the reporting period you checked back the device within. One activity commonly conflated with training is public awareness. The key differences are that training activities utilize a narrow scope, which is intended to provide specific knowledge to targeted groups of participants. Public awareness activities, however, utilize a much more wide scope, which is intended to provide general AT information to the greater community. So one can think of training serving, excuse me. We're just going to go ahead and pull through that slide and go through it together. So public awareness activities, however, utilize a much more wide scope, which is intended to provide general AT information to the greater community. So one can think of it as trainings serving small to large groups of individuals with specific needs versus public awareness events serving large groups of people with diverse needs. Also, when AT advocates perform training activities, they are imparting specific knowledge that is relevant for their participants' specific AT educational needs, which leads into another difference. Training has the aforementioned tailored information transfer, which results in an activity which has more depth and breadth of specific AT expertise, designed to increase participants' knowledge, skills, and competencies regarding AT, as opposed to public awareness activities, which are about disseminating general AT device and service information to the masses. Additionally, at training activities, trainers can typically identify all or most participants, as opposed to public awareness activities, which in general won't allow you to specifically identify all or typically any participants. Another activity under the AT Act, which is commonly confused with training activities, are information and assistance activities. A few ways to distinguish one from another would be to remember that training activities always have more than a single participant involved, versus information and assistance activities where there are typically only a single participant involved in the activity. Occasionally, you'll have an additional person present, whether it be a personal assistant, a spouse, or a family advocate, but they are typically in the peripheries of the interaction. Their role is being supportive rather than being the individual receiving the benefit of your expertise. Training activities also consist of in-depth instruction on an AT-related topic, with the hope of increasing skills and competencies of the involved participants. Whereas information and assistance activities consist of interactions where you're troubleshooting challenges with devices and services, rather than providing an in-depth, typically planned out overview and analysis of an AT-related topic. Also, if you look at what gets reported at the end of the year, a moderate number of training activities are performed throughout the year, around a couple a month across the state of California, whereas a very high number of information and assistance activities are performed throughout the year, with dozens a week across the state of California. Training activities can be commonly conflated with technical assistance activities, which makes sense, as a great deal of technical assistance activities begin with the training. It isn't unusual for an entity to request a training on a topic, and upon receiving the training, realize that there's a greater systemic issue at play in their organization, and then they reach out to continue addressing that systemic issue. It's therefore perfectly acceptable for the first interaction with an entity to be recorded as a training, and the resulting collection of interactions to be counted toward the greater accumulation of interactions that technical assistance activities consist of. As with any activity, looking at the end goal of the activity is your best tool to determine whether, under which category an activity should be recorded. Aiming to educate groups of people on a topic where people learn valuable skills to address a need is a training activity. This is versus educating with the intention of making systemic change to address a need for an entity that could also result in policy, funding, or accessibility changes for the organization, which would be a technical assistance activity. A training activity consists of a single recorded interaction, while technical assistance activities consist of multiple interactions over time. Trainings require much preparation to ensure that they are as full of as much quality content as possible, but the activity itself is typically quickly resolved, with the preparation work being useful to rinse and repeat with minor alterations to fit the needs of other groups who could benefit from this educational activity. This is versus technical assistance activities, which, although also requiring the aforementioned preparation and expertise, typically are long-term projects resolved over the course of multiple interactions with tailored work addressing the specific needs of the interacting entity. On the flip side of what we discussed on the last slide about the frequency of these activities, if you look at what gets reported at the end of the year, a moderate number of training activities are performed throughout the year, around a couple a month across the state of California, whereas a very low number of technical assistance activities are reported throughout the year, only 2 or 3 a year across the state of California. DOR has determined that the AT Act and AT advocates will be supported under the same roof as ILCs, which is very unique, as California is the only state which does this. California AT advocates and the Hub, Ability Tools, perform state leadership activities, and Ability Tools as the Hub performs and contracts out the performance of state level activities, as is the case with California's Device Lending and Demonstration Centers, or DLDCs. One of our requirements as the Hub is to collect, organize, and report all state leadership and level activity data to the federal government. In order for us to count all of the hard work that gets done, it needs to be individually reported by the centers performing the activities. National Assistance Technology Act Data System, or NATADS, is the web-based aggregate data reporting system used by state AT programs to submit the required data elements of the APR as mandated by the AT Act. NATAD's primary purpose is to serve as the official APR data collection mechanism. However, NATADS also has a web-based day-to-day data collection system that can optionally be used by state AT programs for collecting and managing data reporting for all activities included in the state plan for AT and required by the annual progress report. As a result of this day-to-day reporting option being available as a central reporting system capable of ensuring the validation of all of California's data, California's Assistive Technology Advisory Council and the Department of Rehabilitation made the decision that California would utilize NATADS for collecting the data relevant to our state's AT Act activities. Upon your reminder email this morning, you should have received a Word document titled NATADS Activity Guide, Training Activity Entry. I'm now going to do a live walkthrough of the steps you'll go through to enter your training activities. So when you start your NATADS training activity entry, you're going to, of course, log into NATADS using your email address and your unique password. Select the Day-to-Day button on the NATADS homepage. And you're going to make sure that any clients that you have associated with your training activity are entered into NATADS. That way you can associate them with the activity. We've gone over client entry many times in our previous trainings. If you need any additional guidance on checking for clients or entering clients, go ahead and check your NATADS activity guide that I sent out, and it has a walkthrough of that process. And you can also go to some of our previous trainings and take a look at how we've done it through an actual walkthrough. But in the In the interest of saving some time, let's go ahead and skip that part. Once you know that you have all the clients that are associated with your training activity, you can go ahead and go to the State Leadership Functions column. Select the training button, and it's going to take you to the training homepage. From there, underneath the Training Functions banner, you're going to find the button that says Add Training Activity and select it. Under the next screen, Training Entry, under the banner titled Date and User, enter the following information. So you're going to go into the date field, and it's going to automatically populate with the current date. So you have to modify that date to match the date which the training activity occurred, with the exception to this guidance being that if you performed an ICT accessibility training and therefore you're required to collect performance measures, you should record the date based on the date you received the performance measure feedback. So if you look, you can scroll down this page and you'll see that you have banners titled Training Information, Client Related to Training, Participants Related to Training, Description, and a Notes banner. This page stays the same no matter how many different options you choose regarding the training topic or the training type, with the exception of the IT telecom access. So if you do any sort of ICT training, it's going to refresh your page and it'll be the same page with the addition of performance measures. So we're going to go ahead and fill out one with this. That way you see everything that you'll need to know. Obviously, it's going to autofill with the name of the person who has entered into the system. This is why it's very important to make sure to use your login so that people aren't logging things in under your name erroneously, or it just helps verify the data. You don't want to be held accountable if somebody else is putting in information that isn't correct. So if you continue down the screen under the banner titled Training Information, you're going to enter the following information. The training topic. This menu contains the options AT Products Services. Select this option if the training is focused on assistive technology, such as instruction to increase skills and competency in using AT and integrating AT into different settings. There's also the option AT Funding, Policy, Practice. Select this option if the training is focused on funding sources and related laws, policies, and procedures required to implement and deliver access to AT devices and services. IT telecom access. Select this option if the training is focused on accessible information and communication technology, so ICT, including web access, software accessibility, and procurement of accessible ICT. Transition. Select this option if the training is focused on assisting students and adults with disabilities in maintaining or transitioning to community living. These trainings include transitioning to higher education, employment, and community living. Or you also have the option of selecting combination of any or all of the above. Select this option if the training is focused on more than one of the above topics. So, like I said, we're going to go ahead and select the IT telecom access because that makes it so that we can go through all of the processes of filling out this page. You're going to enter the title of your training in the title field. And then you're going to select your training type. There's going to be three options. It's either going to be a basic training, so you're going to select this option if the training was not innovative or high impact or related to transition. You can select high impact or innovative training. You can select this option if it was innovative. So if you utilize unique delivery modes, reached a different audience from typical training participants, or is a topic that's unique or new, or if it's high impact, as in if it were resulting in policy change, or if it had a particularly high number of participants. You would select training related to transition if this was related to school or employment or community living transition. So continuing down the screen, you're going to see the clients related to training banner, and there will be a records table with an Add Clients button located just underneath the banner. This section is where you're going to enter your clients from the client database. To do this, select the Add Clients button, and a form will appear over the training entry page. You'll be able to search for existing clients by using the search by function. So you can select whatever is your best method for finding your client in the database. If you have their email, if you have their first and last name, you can go ahead and grab that and use that to search. And it'll automatically generate your selection based on that. So let's say you select city. It changes to city in the field underneath the search by function. So I'm going to search by last name and type in my old and constant buddy. And once the name pops up in the field, you can select the hyperlinked name. And then there will be a banner that comes across the top of that form that lets you know that you were successful in adding the client to the training activity. You're going to go ahead and repeat this action until you've added all of the involved clients. Once you're done, you're going to hit the close button in the bottom left of the records table form, and you can continue adding the data to your training activity from there. You'll notice that once you've added a client to the activity, that it'll automatically populate the participant information underneath the participants related to training banner. Now, if you have additional participants that you collected very general information, but not enough to be able to create a client account, you can add them at this point. You can add general participants to this section. So you go ahead and select the Add Participant button just underneath the participants related to training banner. And you're going to go ahead and do, in the participant type field, select the appropriate identification as determined by the participant from the drop-down menu. So if they identified as an individual with a disability, representatives of employment, representatives of technology, or if you weren't able to categorize, you weren't able to gather that information, you can select that information. You're going to select whether you want to reflect their region by state and county. And so it's going to automatically fill with California, and you can select the county that they indicated from here, or you can go with metro, non-metro, and you just simply select whether they were located in a metro or a non-metro metropolitan area. Or again, if you didn't gather that information, you only know that the participant was there without any information gathered, go ahead and select unknown. And then you have the option to enter the number of participants. So if you had a couple of people from the same center show up at a training and they are both from Fresno, you know that you had 2 people there, go ahead and put in 2 participants and add them. Hit the add button in the bottom left-hand corner of the form, and it'll add those individuals to your participants related to the training. So continuing down the screen under the description banner, there will be a text box with a 10,000 character count limit. Enter the following information under your description: the month, day, year of the training, the medium of the training, whether it was in person or virtual, staff involved. So you're going to want to put the first and last name in the title of the individuals that were involved in the training. So if I were participating, I'd put my name and my title. And if I had Megan along with me, I'd put her name and her title, just to give a complete picture of who was performing the activity. We're going to put the characteristics of the recipient agency. That's whenever it's applicable. So typically trainings are aimed to specific groups based on a training need. And so you can describe the groups that participated in your training and how the training topic was relevant to their needs. You can also describe the training characteristics, so the topics that you covered. You should also be able to describe the positive results or the impact of the training. So any successful learning objectives of the training. Continuing down the screen under the notes banner, there will be a text box with the 10,000 character count limit. Enter any unique issues related to the training. There aren't always unique issues related to the training. So if you don't have anything to enter there, that's fine. Just make sure you give a decent description in the description box. So again, if you selected the IT telecom access as your training topic, you're going to need to collect performance measures. The training entry page is going to reflect this requirement by adding an IT telecommunications training performance measure banner underneath the above described notes section. If this is the type of training you've performed, enter the results of your gathered performance measures under the IT telecommunications training performance measure by entering the number of participants of the respondents who selected each option. So if you had 3 individuals who were attending the training for development of policies and procedures, you're going to enter in the amount of people that were there for that reason. If they were there for training or technical assistance that's going to be developed or implemented to ensure IT and telecommunications, you're going to enter the amount of people who responded that that's why they were there. You can also put no known outcome at this time. Sometimes you attend a training and you don't necessarily know how it's going to be applicable to your agency. And so that's a very valid answer. So you can go ahead and add that number. And then if you had any non-respondent individuals, you can add it to that space also. You're going to try and avoid having non-respondent individuals as much as you feasibly can. I believe, I don't want to give a number on a recorded training and give out erroneous information, but there is a specific amount, a percentage of individuals that are allowed to be non-respondent, but you want to keep it underneath a certain number. So just do your best to get responses from as many of your participants as possible. From there, you're going to go ahead and select the Save button in the bottom left-hand corner, and you will have, oh, I didn't fill out all of my information, but you'll have saved your training activity from that point. And let's go ahead and head back to our PowerPoint slide and have a little bit of Q&A and discussion. See if anybody has any questions, clarifications, concerns, any input on how you perform training activities, you know, leading up to the event, during the event, following the event. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it, and a lot of work that goes into the back end of it, collecting all the information. So if anyone has any thoughts or questions, feel free to drop it into the Q&A, and Megan and I would be happy to discuss them with you.
This is Megan. Marisol has a question from earlier on. She wanted to know, can we add support groups that we are a part of?
So I think I would need a little more clarification from Marisol. Support groups so much, are you performing trainings for these groups? Can you describe the group a little bit more? If you are participating and it's sort of just a group session where you're having discussions and it's very free flow, it probably wouldn't fit under training activities. A training activity is going to be more of a guided skill building discussion. So if you can clarify a little more on what those groups look like, then I can let you know if those count.
And this is Megan. Marisol, I just gave you access to the microphone if you'd like to ask the question out loud.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Go for it.
Thank you. So yeah, I was thinking about support groups. Like I'm part of the TBI support group. They invited me to their groups recently. And I do like little mini presentations about different devices. So we could add that to our training and other stuff in NATADS, correct?
Yeah, that would definitely work. You just have to make sure that it's not just a general overview. It can't be like a show and tell. Hey, look, this is what we have and this is what it generally does. This is what we have and this is what it generally does. If it's an in-depth and rich description of the functions of those devices and you feel that they've actually like built their competencies by participating in it, it is definitely a training.
Okay, because we do it based on topics. So I remember the last one we did was based off of memory. So I presented different devices for memory.
And did you give like descriptions of the devices and their functions and let's sort of the pros and cons of such?
Yes, I did like a whole PowerPoint.
Well, yeah, that sounds like a training to me, girl. That's awesome. That's great that you're doing that work.
Okay, then. So I just wanted to make sure.
Great. Thanks for asking.
Awesome, Marisol. And if anyone else has questions, please send them to us in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand on Zoom to speak. I did have a follow-up question, Catherine. I think you mentioned it briefly, But when performing a training activity, if we find out that it is going to lead to technical assistance rather than just being a training activity, do we have to go back and delete the training we reported, or can it count as a training and then count as technical assistance moving forward?
Thanks, Megan. That's a good question. So when it comes to a training turning into a technical assistance, I can see how one might think that they need to delete the training in order to sort of transition that activity into a technical assistance, because in most cases, we don't want to double dip, right, with AT Act funding. But I've gotten guidance specifically from the people who work on this act on a national level that the first activity, there's no way to know that it was going to be a technical assistance, and it in itself was a training. So as long as you don't continue counting every interaction within that technical assistance toward trainings, that first one is perfectly fine, because there was no way to know that it was going to become a technical assistance, or sometimes the reverse. Sometimes you go into a situation, I've actually had this happen a couple months ago, where somebody was positive that we're going to be working together over a couple of months to work on a technical assistance for their organization. And we did a training. But after that, it ended up not following through. They ended up losing funding for what they were going to be working on. So in that case, I would have recorded it as technical assistance and not a training, but then I would have had to go back and fix it because it was wrong. So it is best to record it as a training when it first happens. And if things turn into a technical assistance, just make sure you're collecting all of your information for a nice, rich technical assistance report later on. And we're going to be getting into technical assistance next month if anybody's curious about that.
Great, Catherine. And another question here is, can you have trainings that are one-on-one with just one person and you, or do there need to be more people involved?
No, and that one I learned the hard way. I was really hoping that a lot of the in-depth trainings that we had one-on-one when I first started on were trainings, because it seemed like a training, right? But unless there are more than one participant involved in your training, then it's not a training. It's going to be an information and assistance.
So that's a really great difference between the two. If there's only one person, it's going to be information and assistance, no matter how much time you spend with that person.
Yep. We can even click back on a couple slides. It's one of our differentiating factors is if it's greater than one, then it can be a training. But if it's one, INA.
What about if you're helping walk someone through how to set up a Zoom meeting? Where would you count that?
Oh, it's still going to be INA if you're working one-on-one with someone. If you're working with an organization, it can be a training, and that would be an ICT training. And that one, you're going to want to make sure to collect performance measures on why they were reaching out to you for this information. But if it's a one-on-one, still going to be INA. You're just working hands-on with somebody, helping them work through a problem.
Thank you. And Marisol, if that did not answer, please let us know in the chat if you want, or in the Q&A if you'd like to clarify. So we have another question here. Could you give us an example of what a high impact training was from the previous year, of one that maybe we reported federally?
Oh, goodness. I'm trying to remember. The APR is just awash in my mind. It was a month of just a lot of work. So for high impact training, I think we might have gone for reaching large numbers. I think that was one of the high impact parameters that we met, because I remember we were discussing just how many people attended the Word and PowerPoint accessibility trainings. And that was an unusually high amount of individuals who participated in that training. And so underneath the high impact, that's how that category fits in. I know that we also had discussions about a lot of the under innovative, we were discussing how we did a lot of Zoom trainings for organizations who otherwise wouldn't have been able to function in a virtual environment. And so since that was sort of like a new technology to these groups, and it was something that was an emergency response to being virtual for COVID, that fit that innovative category. And so you're just looking for things that are novel, that are new. You're looking for things that have a large impact on your community.
And if folks aren't sure if the training they're doing is high impact, can they reach out to you, Catherine, for assistance?
Always, always. Everybody knows they can email me, they can call me. Most people even have my personal number. Anything you guys need, I'm always here to answer questions. And if I don't get back to you, it's just because I'm getting swamped on things. And so if you just call me, I'll be happy to, I will be relieved to take a break to have a discussion with you, believe me.
And I think it might be really helpful just to chime in. This is Megan. The reason it's helpful for us is we, at the end of the year, have to submit a federal report. So we do go back and look at all of the data that's submitted. So if you're unsure when you're submitting it, give us a call so we can get it right from the start. So we don't have to go back and correct things at the end. Catherine, do you want to add on to that at all?
Oh, no, just here. Yeah, December was a lot of validating data. And so if you guys are able to reach out to us throughout the year, it makes December a far less stressful month for us at least, and I appreciate that. And also kind of a far less stressful month for you guys, because sometimes I know I have to reach out to you guys to make modifications to your data, and I hate doing that to you right before Christmas. That's not cool. So as it's coming in, if you have a question, just reach out. You're never going to be a bother to me. I love talking with you guys, and I talk too much. So email me, call me, text me. If you have my personal number, text messaging is perfectly acceptable. So yeah, just if you have any questions, we're definitely here, and we're happy to do one-on-one interactions to really make sure that you have a full comfort with the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Catherine. And there's one more question here. Do you know what definition we're using when we define somebody being in a metro or non-metro area?
So, a metro and a non-metro, I believe probably the easiest way to determine that is if somebody is living in a city versus a county. If you're in the county area, that's more of a non-metro kind of thing. Metropolitan is more urban city locations.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any last questions for us? Please feel free to send them to us in the Q&A. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Okay, well, Catherine, I know we have another training coming next month. Could you give us a sneak peek of what that will be?
Yeah, next month, I believe next on the slate is technical assistance. So this one is going to be definitely more of an FYI sort of discussion about the ins and outs of the technical assistance under the AT Act, because most people are not really concerned with technical assistance. It's something that happens so rarely, but it is very interesting, and it's good to know how it interacts with your work. So if you're wanting to have a nice full scope of the work that is supported through the AT Act, you definitely want to head to this training. I get a lot of questions about technical assistance.
Awesome, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions come through, so we'll go ahead and close out if that's all right with you, Catherine.
Well, I did want to throw a little something out there if people don't mind hanging on for another minute or two. I wanted to kind of throw out the idea that, particularly when it comes to trainings, we're in this unique position where COVID has kind of made things difficult, right? Put aside the actual difficulty of COVID-19 itself, but it's made training very difficult to execute because we used to go into these spaces and get really hands-on with people. But it also has opened it up in a way that people who weren't able to participate fully before are now able to virtually participate. I know that we had a lot of centers who couldn't participate before because they weren't anywhere near where the training was occurring, because we could only go to so many places, and now people are on board. I'm hearing from people who are in the far reaches of California who I really didn't get to interact with as much before, and that's great. And so one thing that you might want to keep in mind if you're doing virtual trainings is to try your best to keep it engaging and compelling. Try to utilize breakout rooms, try to utilize polls, and inject an element of play into the interaction. Because Zoom fatigue is real, and it's been a year of Zoom. And so don't, as much as I say this when we have our mics turned off, so it feels very contradictory, have it be more play, more comfortable, and you're going to enjoy it, your consumers are going to enjoy it, and it's not all doom and gloom out there. Virtual events can be fun too.